Hello, hello everyone. Welcome to our session on the legal design. Just 1 or 2 minutes on myself to present the why are we here today. So Aurélia and I, from her lab and my digital law center, University of Geneva and University of Lausanne, we decided, I think 6 months ago, to organize a series of workshop online about legal design. I guess everyone today is also as enthusiastic as we are with legal design. We are all aware that we are all surrounded by legal and complex information, which creates barriers to access to justice, to participation. And the idea with legal design is to transform this legal complexity into more accessible information with more engaging formats to bridge the gaps between the law and users. And legal design is at the intersection between law, technology, and design. And that's why today we are very happy to welcome our next guest speaker that Aurélia will introduce in a minute. Just on my part, I just wanted to remind you that we had past sessions, already 3 past sessions that are all available on our platform. They started last May, and we will have also 3 or 2 additional sessions in October and November, at which you are very welcome. And again, they are all recorded, so you can have access to them also after the workshop. That's all on my part. I'm very happy to give the floor to Aurélia, and I'm very grateful to Hannes to be part of us today. And we look forward to hearing you. Aurélia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Yaniv, so much for this introductory remark. And yes, welcome, Hannes, and thank you so much for being here today with us to talk about JusticeBot. As a very brief introduction, because you all want to hear from Hannes and not from us. So Hannes is an assistant professor in law and artificial intelligence at Maastricht University. He's also a member of the Law and Tech Lab there, and his research has focused very much on the use of AI and legal automations, more generally speaking, to increase access to justice. He has obtained a PhD from the University of Montreal and the Cyber Justice Laboratory, and has developed JusticeBot. And this is a tool that you will right now tell us more about, so not taking anything away, that has been used many, many times. I think you say like over 50,000 times. Has been cited by numerous journals, and it's so great that you're here to teach and tell us more about JusticeBot. So thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this kind introduction and also for having me. Very, very excited to be here. So let me share my screen here. Great. Are you able to see it? Yeah, perfect. All right. Yeah. So yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm going to talk about JusticeBot and other tools to make law better for lay people, as you mentioned. And I'm gonna think a bit about the design of these tools. So these are various projects I've worked on, and they all have their own design, both in terms of user interface, but also in terms of how the system works and integrates with the legal system. And so excited to explore this question with you, and hope you'll have some feedback or questions at the end that we can then talk about. So I'm going to introduce the topic a bit and then talk about actually 4 different projects that I'm working on. So the JusticeBot, that is Dalma, there's a legal intake project, and the LL mediator, and then briefly wrap up with a few concluding thoughts on these topics. So to introduce, well, in many places, lay people have trouble resolving their everyday legal issues. And here we're thinking about things like neighborhood issues, housing disputes, and so on, and obtaining government benefits. So things like applying for social aid or getting various licenses can all be very challenging. And there's multiple reasons for this. First of all, of course, the complexity, understanding the law and how it applies to you and what it means is very challenging for people without a legal degree. Then there's the complexity of forms and other documents. Filling in a letter or a court submission or a legal form can in itself be a challenge. It's very hard to know what to put, how to phrase it, and so on. And finally, there's of course the cost of going to court. Costs, well, in terms of money, but also in terms of time. It can take a long time, and in terms of emotion. So many people experience this as being something that's very stressful and often frustrating, which is also a cost of using these systems. So recently, there's been this revolution in AI, and with the advent of large language models that essentially try to predict the next word in a sequence. They work a bit like the keyboard on your phone, where you can click the next word to get some sort of text. Of course, on your keyboard, if you keep doing that over and over, the text won't be very interesting. But these large language models are able to write very sophisticated text in many different domains just based on this concept. So of course, there's been a lot of thought about how can we use these to increase access to justice, to address the challenges that I just spoke about. And one kind of straightforward way of doing it is just asking ChatGPT directly, like asking a legal question and seeing what it responds. So here's an experiment I did quite early on in ChatGPT's when it's just released. I asked it to give me the relevant legal articles regarding a water leak in an apartment from the Quebec Civil Code. And here are some articles, and they look great, but looking at them in detail, it turns out that many of them are in fact completely made up, or the number is wrong. So this is maybe not something that should be relied on in all circumstances. And we explore this further in this publication if you're interested. But overall, even though these models are super powerful and very exciting what you can do with them, they do have some limitations. One of them is, as I mentioned, hallucinations. Sometimes they don't know things and then confidently make up wrong information. This kind of also goes together with their tone. Even if they're not sure, they will take a very authoritative, very positive tone on the knowledge, which means that you may overestimate how good the answer is and what it means. They may also contain biases, as in they absorb data that's out there on the internet to maybe contain implicit biases. And there could potentially be privacy issues with sending data to a server that then gets processed and sent back to you, such as in ChatGPT. Also one that's a bit less known, but that's the blinking cursor problem. And that means that it turns out that when you go to ChatGPT, you're just confronted with an empty text box, right? And you need to know what to ask for. And this means that the people who are best able to use these models to rely on ChatGPT are legal experts, the ones that know what to ask for and which terms to ask the question in. And this is not something that lay people aren't very good at all the time. So even if it might be very easy for us to use it for legal information, lay people may not actually be able to do so to the same extent. And this all comes down to this good versus bad use cases. I think some use cases that aren't ideal, such as maybe asking directly for legal information in all instances. This has been referred to as the jagged technological frontier. And that is the frontier, the blue line that you see here is what AI is able to do. And the gray line is what we think should be tasks of similar difficulty. As you can see, it doesn't quite align. Some things that we think are very difficult, LLMs are really good at, but some things it's not so good at all. And it can be kind of hard to tell the two apart. So that brings us to the questions that I'm going to explore today with some examples. What are some good use cases for generative AI in the legal field? All right, so first let's talk about the JusticeBot. So I'm just going to show you how it works in fact, because this is online. This is something you can try at justicebot.ca. As you can see here, this is in French since it targets Quebec. And this is a tool that seeks to answer legal questions in Quebec regarding landlord-tenant disputes. So how it works is that you're first given some information on how it works and what it does. And upon agreeing to this, also, of course, a disclaimer saying that this does not replace a lawyer. But upon agreeing to this, you're taken to a question, are you a landlord or a tenant? So we get some additional explanation of this. And let's say that we are a landlord here and our tenant has stopped paying the rent. And we are not sure what to do, what our rights are in this situation. So let's say here's a list of possible options. Now that we select that we're a landlord, let's say the tenant does not pay their rent is the option we want to look at. So we click at this, and we can see that the system starts to drill down into the situation to better understand. First, it asks, is the tenant currently late with paying their rent? So let's say no, at the moment they are actually up to date. So let's say no here. And you see also that there's a simplified explanation here, and there are also links to more information and laws. Let's say no. Next question is the tenant frequently late with paying their rent? And here, so frequently late is of course an open textual concept. So in order to support the user in answering this question, we give them here case law examples. Now these are all examples from previous cases where the judge decided what that means. What does it mean to be frequently late in paying your rent? And if you click on these, you can read the entire case to better understand. So I want to highlight this for a bit because this was a really explicit design choice that we made, is that the JusticeBot isn't necessarily going to tell you what will happen in your situation, but rather its role is more referring you specifically to the information that is specifically helpful to you in that situation. So it works a bit like a casebook where we highlight these examples, we provide summaries of these cases that are helpful to you, but you do in this case. Let's say the user thinks yes here, and also that there's a serious prejudice at the end of this due to these frequent delays in paying. So the system analyzes this now and then provides us a list of legal rights that you may have. And again, some example decisions here with outcomes. And finally, you are also taken to a list of next steps, things that you can undertake in order to try to resolve your situation, such as trying to find a friendly solution and obtaining additional advice or going to court. So the idea is that the user, by navigating through the system and understanding what rights they have, they're suddenly in a much better situation to interact with the legal system. So no matter if they end up finding a friendly resolution, ideally, they go to the other party and say, look, we know I have these rights, let's come to a resolution here. Or obtaining additional, knowing where to go to get additional information, or going to court. This information is something that can be very helpful for the user and put them in a better situation to end up interacting with the legal system. And as I mentioned, this is something that's put online. And so in order to make sure that it doesn't give incorrect information, I want to show you kind of how it's built, how it works behind the scenes. So this is the back end of the JusticeBot. As you can see, it looks kind of like a flowchart. There's these blocks, each of which is a screen, and you can follow the arrows to see what clicking a certain option here will take you. So if you click no here, as we did, the tenant is currently late with paying their rent. We're taking you to the next question. Are they frequently late in paying the rent? Here it is translated to English, in fact, and just for showing. And we can see that we eventually are taken to the final answers here based on the things that are clicked. And these are always the same. So unlike ChatGPT, where the answer can differ kind of based on exactly how you phrase it, here we know exactly which answers the user will see when clicking different options in these boxes. So that's a part of design, right? Like we design it in a way where we could verify the answers, and a lawyer was able to go through these and make sure that they were accurate. Again, that's not necessarily the only way to go, but that is a consideration we made here to build something that we could put online at that stage. So as I mentioned before, this was launched at the CyberJust laboratory with some partners, and you can try it at justicebot.ca. And it has been used over 50,000 times since then. And generally, users seem to be quite happy with the information that they got and see that it's something they would recommend to their friends. And so this kind of narrows down to the question, JusticeBot versus ChatGPT, right? Which approach is better? But in my opinion, that's the wrong question to ask. Instead, we should ask this: how can we combine the strengths of the JusticeBot, which is viable, together with ChatGPT and the power that brings to the table? So we explored this in some ways. So first of all, can LLMs be used to help the annotator with the construction of legal pathways? So I saw your pathways here, but as you can imagine, depending on how many legal questions you have, there are many different branches and many different information in the system. So creating that can take quite a lot of time. So we explored what if ChatGPT could help out with this. And we explored this in this paper. And the results were quite promising. So on the left here, you see a legal article. A person may not be an adopter unless he's at least 18 years older than the person adopted, except where the person adopted is the child of the spouse of the adopter. And you can see that in this case, this was correctly translated into a logical pathway that breaks out these criteria and links them together in a way that could be entered into the JusticeBot. And overall, this worked very well. So in 90% of the cases of the pathways generated, we found that the pathway was either perfect in terms of logics, or it only needed a very small adjustment to be useful for this purpose. And something that could save a lot of time. But the thing about design here, also, this is not a use case that directly targets the user, because this would go to a legal expert beforehand. Like, this is not meant to do the job directly. It's something that suggests a pathway to the expert, who can then adjust it and update it to make sure that it's accurate. So they kind of save time while also being in that position to make sure that the content is actually correct. Case law. I mentioned there's case law on the JusticeBot that is used as a guide for the user. What if LLMs could be used for that? It's another paper we presented this summer in Chicago. And here the results were also very promising. So the best model here managed to, in 97% of the cases, correctly assess from previous case law whether a judge had found a criterion to apply or not. So they read through cases, they were given these JusticeBot criteria or similar criteria, and they said, yeah, the judge found this to apply or not, and also generated a summary of why that was the case. And it worked very well, in both the summaries and the answers. And we built this interface here that allows you to explore different criteria and generate summaries that can then be attached to these nodes to look at the cases. And this is open source, so if you want to try this, feel free to go to the GitHub here and run it yourself. Good, so that's JusticeBot. That's a way of giving legal information to people and informing them of their rights, which can then be used to take the next steps. Now, the next steps may involve, of course, filling in forms, which, as I mentioned before, is something that can be quite challenging. And so in the project, we want to explore, can LLMs help users fill out forms or draft emails? Now, legal forms are quite complex, as you can imagine, depending on the field. They can have many different fields that are interacting in different ways. Some of them can be slot in responses, such as your name and address. This is generally not very hard to fill in, but they can be more and more complex, all the way to created answers, where you need to draft a new response, draft a narrative, or choose an option based on kind of legal requirements. And this is something that is generally quite tricky for lay people, meaning that it can be an impediment to them in filling out these forms. So Dalma is a way to combine this JusticeBot structured reasoning with LLMs and to fill in forms or draft documents. And is something that I'm working on at the moment. I'm quite excited about. So just to show you quickly how this works. This is the same case that we saw before. And here I've created a template that looks at the decision regarding late payment of rent, and then puts in different fields into this document to write a legally relevant document here. There's just an exploration here, writing the decision, probably not something you would want to do. The idea is more that this could be used for filling in forms. So let's say we have two people here. The landlord is called Thomas. The tenant is called Lucas. I am the judge in this case. Now the system asked, and these were, as you can see, directly put into the document. There's no stage in between because these are names. These we probably know by default. But summarizing a case, here we might be looking for very specific requirements and things that need to be inside this text. So let's see here what happens when we put down. So this is yellow here, meaning an LLM will kind of assemble this information and put it in the correct format. So let's say we just say Lucas is late with paying rent. It's not very specific. So if we submit this, we'll see that the system realizes it doesn't have the required context here and asks a follow-up question instead. In this case, can you provide details on how many weeks the tenant is currently late with paying rent and how frequently they have been late in the past? Let's say they are currently 5 weeks late, but it's the first time. So we submit this, We see that the system has slightly rephrased this. The tenant is currently 5 weeks late with paying rent. This is the first time the tenant has been late in the past year. But we can also see that it goes through the different sections and goes through the legal criteria related to this. So it decides, you can see here the law saying that if the tenant is more than 3 weeks late with paying their rent, the lease can be terminated, or if the tenant is frequently late with paying the rent and the landlord suffers a serious prejudice. And we can see here that in this case, the tenant is currently 5 weeks late in paying the rent. Therefore, the criteria of being more than 3 weeks late is met and the lease can be terminated. However, the tenant is not frequently late in paying rent. The decision is this tenant is currently more than 3 weeks late in paying the rent, they can be evicted. We can see here how the system kind of jumps back and forth. Some information is written by the LLM, some is based on the information I provided, but in the end we have this kind of structured output that can then be printed and used for various circumstances. That's one use case here, but the idea is that this is a platform that can be adapted to many different use cases. Just to quickly show you how the interface looks here. So here we have the different, there's a template here that we can edit, but we can also look at these variables. And we can see, so we saw the facts of the case summary, we can see the instructions that were given to the LLM in this case. So we say make sure to include information on whether the tenant is currently late, and if so, for how many weeks, and how frequently they have been late in the past year. And we can see that we were given an example of how to phrase this as well. So all of this is something that the LLM incorporated in making this decision on how to phrase this specific answer. So that's Dalma. Again, something that's early, but that we're working on. And there's many ways of expanding this. And so one of them could be, well, here you of course still need to provide the information. So if it asks details from your lease, you would still have to actually find your lease and look at the right fields. We also did some exploratory research to see maybe we can skip that part. Maybe we can just take a picture of legal documents and have an LLM also look for the information in there and extract them. So the idea is you could take pictures of forms, of letters, of contracts, and so on. Have an AI analyze that content and then put this directly into a filled out form or provide legal information. So here's some, to make an experiment, we kind of wrote down the same things and then use different cameras and different forms to have this. Here you can see a picture taken with a pretty good camera and one with a bit older phone and in worse lighting conditions. And to make it troubling for it a bit, we also made even harder ones where there's crossed out information and it's very blurry in some instances. Just kind of to explore what it can do and what it can't do. Now, the results weren't perfect here. You can see that when the HD refers to the good camera here, typed is just a screenshot of a PDF, so that's the easiest to read. We can see that that's of course easier. We can see that if we use the bad camera and it's sloppy writing, it's much harder for the model. But overall, the results were quite promising, especially since, again, we don't need to directly go from LLM output to answer. We can just suggest it to the user and then come in and correct anything that they see is wrong, while saving time and also having an easier time finding the right information in the form. And impressively enough, in these instances where it's almost impossible for me to read, the model was still able to find the right information. So I did see that the name was Moran here, which is an unusual name. It's very blurry. Here we crossed some out and put the circle around the two, and here it can read my version of the cursive writing here that says London and correctly identify that as well. So yeah, that's Dalma. That's if the user wants to fill out forms themselves. But what if the user wants to leverage legal aid? That's something that exists in many areas, and that's something that can help people by connecting them to a lawyer who pro bono takes on their case. This is a project we explored together with a colleague from the US, Quinton, who's at Suffolk University. And here we want to see maybe an LLM can help with the task of performing legal intake. Now, the issue here is that in order to even know in the first place if you are eligible for legal aid, you often have to speak to someone on the phone. And this means that you may have to stand the phone line for multiple hours in some cases, and also, of course, takes a lot of resources from these legal aid clinics. This is because there's some formal requirements, and this is like level of income and so on. But there's also substantive requirements for each legal aid clinic that tells what kind of cases does this specific clinic take. And here, these might change over time. They might be very specific. and assessing them requires a person. So usually it's a phone call, which again, it means that you may have to wait in line for many hours in practice, which may mean that people actually don't get the resources they need. So my colleague Quentin has built a system that asks questions to help the user understand if they're eligible or not. And in this case, at some of this regard income and location, these are kind of straightforward because there's like, if you have over a certain amount of income, you are eligible, otherwise not. But when it comes to the specific housing problem, that's where the substantive assessment come in. And we're going to see here if an LLM can do this assessment. So here the user would kind of explain, I got a notice I lost my eviction case, and then the LLM would give them feedback on if this falls in the substantive guidelines or not. There's an example here. We prepared some scenarios, such as I'm having issues with my landlord not following our lease agreement. The lease says that I'm responsible for maintaining the property, but there have been so many problems, like a leaking roof and broken heating, that he hasn't fixed. I've tried to resolve this with him, but nothing has changed. I need legal advice on how to enforce the terms of my lease. So normally they would call in and they would then receive some information. And there's like a long document of rules that says whether they should be eligible or not. So here's an excerpt from this rule saying that in this case, pre-lawsuit tenant has good claims against the landlord. Tenant must have notified landlord. And one of the issues is no heater ventilation, one of the examples. So in this case, it does map and it's accept, but you can see there's pretty complex legal reasoning, right? You really need to understand what of these specific rules applies and how does it apply in this case. So we built a LLM to predict these, and you have this setup here and how this works. And this would be kind of like a pre-stage to the phone call. So instead of directly going to the phone, you could go to the website and the system would inform you, we think you have a case. It could also say, I need more information, please give more information, or you may not have a case in this instance. And now what's kind of bad is if the system says you don't have a case, you wouldn't be eligible, but you are actually eligible, because then you wouldn't call in. It's much better, in fact, for it to be err on the side of caution here, to say, yeah, you are eligible. The user would then call in and they might not be eligible after all. And the system, of course, never tells you right out you're eligible. It thinks it sounds like you may have a case, call this number, or it sounds like there may be not an instance here. But we can see that we told the model this. We said, err on the side of caution, be careful in your assessments. It's better to accept or ask follow-up questions. And looking at so this is the real outcome here, accept. And if we look at here, how much, when the real decision should be accept, and the predicted answer is deny, this is very rare. So the system actually managed to understand this constraint, and most of the time it was correct in accepting, or denying was very accurate, but it would rather err on the side of caution rather than denying someone that should actually be accepted. Again, an experiment, of course, but I think something that is quite promising in helping people get better matched with legal aid. Good. The final project I want to show you is what happens even after that. So maybe if you weren't able to use these resources and you want to enter into mediation to try to find a resolution with the other party. So we built a paper here that explores if LLMs can be used to support mediation. And I want to show you quickly how the system looks. Good. So this is a chat interface, and this is a prototype. So it's really showing two parties. This is regarding a broken window here. So let's say Jane, one of the parties, says, you kicked a ball through my window. Please pay up. Now John on the other side, I can switch here, says, no, I never did it. I don't even play football. Let's say Jane at this point gets very upset. She's super angry and she says, you idiot. I know it was you. I will see you in court. This message, if sent, might completely derail the conversation and might push these people into just not finding a solution at all. So if if you click send here, system reformulated in a way where this anger is not there, but the message has the same content. It says, I believe you're involved in this issue and I'm very concerned. I hope we can resolve this matter together, but if needed, we may have to seek a legal resolution. You can say it has the elements there, but it is a very different tone that may be more better for continuing this constructive dialogue. But importantly, and this is also part of the, I think, the design of the system, is that the user then has a choice here. They can say, yeah, that sounds much better, I'm going to send that. But then maybe, no, I said what I said, I'd rather send the original. Or they might even close and write something different altogether. So it's a nudge, but it doesn't get in between the communication here. It's really just highlighting to the user what might occur. And he sent this. Let's say John says, whatever, I will not pay. They're not able to find a resolution here. And finally, maybe a mediator is called to intervene here. So in this case, the mediator can then, instead of writing directly a message here, they can ask the LLM to suggest an intervention to them. So the LLM now reads this text and writes a text that the mediator may want to send. Understand that the situation is causing tension between both of you. It's important to approach this calmly and find a resolution. Perhaps you could provide any additional evidence or reasons. John, it could be helpful if you could think of any information or witnesses that might clarify the situation from your perspective. This sounds like pretty good. It seems to have a grasp of disputes here and seems to have found some ways that maybe they can move this forward. But maybe the mediator, again, maybe they're not happy. Maybe they say it's not good. Maybe focus on their mutual friendship and understanding. They can send this and the LLM will now incorporate this information when drafting this. So we can see here, remember that maintaining your mutual friendship and understanding each other's position is vital as we work towards a solution. So it took the information into account and the mediator can shape it that way. Maybe they want to edit it, they want to change it some way. But overall, this is something that may be able to save time on behalf of the mediator. Now, eventually, maybe the parties could directly call a mediator. And this may be useful in situations where there aren't enough mediators, or maybe the dispute value is very small and it's actually not worth it to engage a mediator. The person could here request an intervention and the mediator by itself writes a message. That, of course, would need much more. I mean, all of this is research, right? But that would need much more risk assessment and analysis, but it's something that could be very interesting eventually. Now, we did some analysis of how well this works and published it in this paper. And it turns out that, so here we ourselves wrote some intervention messages in a dispute, and LLM writes some messages as well. And then we asked neutral, like we annotated the messages without knowing which was which was us and which one was the LLM. And we found that in most cases, people actually prefer the LLM written message. In 80% of cases across all dimensions. Now, this is interesting. I don't think it is. It's, of course, you have to be careful what you get from that, because, of course, we are not trained mediators. Most of us weren't English native speakers and so on. But it does show that from a very, there's definitely something there where LLMs are able to write pretty good messages that do what they're supposed to, and in a way that is at least very promising. Good, so let's quickly wrap up. First of all, I think often the dialogue about LLMs focused on something like this, a robot that comes in to replace people or take our jobs. I think it is much more interesting to frame it like this, like a tool that can support legal actors in many different ways. LLMs, I think, are incredibly exciting and powerful. They can do many tasks without being trained. That's, I think, one of the big advances here is that previously you would need a lot of data to train an AI model, but now you can just ask or prompt an LLM to do what you want it to do, and often the results are pretty good. I find this very impressive, and especially in the legal domain where there is not a lot of data, this has very interesting implications. There is a lot of potential in access to justice, I think. Like it is an area where there's a lot of demand, and LLMs can get you to a certain stage, and people really don't have access to a lawyer in many cases. But it is important to consider the challenges as well, such as hallucinations, and we saw how that could affect the quality of the output. again, I find finding the right use cases is really crucial here. Thinking about how can we deploy the system in a way where if it messes up, it's not the end of the world. I find augmented intelligence to be an interesting approach here. You saw on the JusticeBot, for example, where the system doesn't necessarily tell you what you should do or what will happen, but just tries to give you a better context. And the same with the LL mediator, where we suggested ways of reformulating messages to the parties instead of directly intervening. So here we use the LM to give additional context to enhance the decision-making of the end person while leaving the final decision in their hands. At the same time, this field is moving very quickly. Models get better every week. There's releases happening all the time. And of course, we need to think about, well, maybe at some point it does make sense, especially given that the alternative for many users today is to not have access to any legal information at all. Some kind of considerations that can help guide this decision is who's the user. If you are a layperson, the constraints are, of course, very different. The law and can make sure it is accurate, which lay people may not always have the capability of doing. What happens with the output? Again, as I mentioned, does it go directly to a user, or does it go through a human in the loop that can verify the information and then to a user? And finally, what is the purpose of the legal system? That's a bit of a bigger question, but in designing these systems and integrating them in the legal system, of course, they will affect the outcomes, what people do, how they interact with the legal system, and so on. I think this gives us a lot of opportunities to think about what do we actually want to achieve. What are the metrics that are the crucial ones? And we're thinking about satisfaction on part of the user, legal fairness, and effectiveness of the legal system, legal harmony. All of these are very important factors that I think many of these systems could, in theory, increase. But we also need to think of the trade-offs there and the normative decision-making that comes with building systems that encode these in digital platforms. But to wrap everything up, I think there's just a start. I think there's so much potential here, especially with how quickly these things move, and so many things that we can explore to see where this integration can lead, what the trade-offs are, but also how we can eventually deploy them in order to support lay people and contribute to a society that is more inclusive and more equal and gives a better access to justice to many people. But thank you very much for listening. Now I'm very happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Hannes, for this great presentation. I was actually wondering when you were showing the graphic also of like the empathy and how it's the LLMs are perceived, if you're a little bit scared.